My brother is getting away with something so ridiculous it makes me sick. He knocked up my soon-to-be wife just a week before we're getting married, and then my mom convinced my fiancé that it would be better now to be with my brother because he's more successful, and, well, she is carrying his baby. Well, obviously my world came crashing down, so I decided to do something drastic. Some betrayals hit you like a hard slap to the face, but others, they just build up over time. So subtle you don't even realize what's happening until it's too late to walk away. 3 years ago, I, 35, thought that I was walking into the happiest day of my life. Instead, I walked straight into the biggest humiliation I've ever experienced. The kind that you would not even wish on your enemy. I tried not to blame myself whenever I think about it, but looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs, the red flags, they were always there. I just didn't want to acknowledge them. I was a firm believer in giving people the benefit of the doubt, but it turns out my mother should have been further down the list of said people. My name's Christopher, and I was just born first of my mom, Pamela. Hardly call her mother now. To me, she's just a lady who birthed me first. I was never Pamela's favorite. Hell, I don't even think she liked me. As for my brother James, he was her pride and joy. The golden kid, the perfect son. I may have been the older one, but I was just that. It didn't matter that I was the first to graduate, the first to start my own business, and the first to actually build something for myself. A stable life. She barely tolerated me. It might sound a bit exaggerated, but trust me, I know what I'm saying. James could try and fail at literally everything and still be showered with love and excuses. Meanwhile, I could be swimming in success, and she'd still find a way to remind me I was doing something wrong and that I wasn't good enough. Desperate to find somebody who'd always be in my corner, I found my fiancée Ruth, and eventually she knew all this. She got to see firsthand how my mother treated me. Naturally, she comforted me whenever my mother cut me down in front of whoever was there, taking the opportunity to compare me to my brother. So, naturally, I thought Ruth was on my side. I thought she loved me, but turns out I was suffering from a severe case of delusion. Now, don't get me wrong, Pamela played a huge role in this, but there were countless other little things. Things that seemed harmless at the time, and there was the fact Ruth was always friendly with James. But she was friendly with everyone. That just is who she was. At least that's what I told myself. There was this way James always joked about stealing my girl. The way Ruth sometimes laughed too hard at his joke, and the way my mother constantly dropped a hint about James being a better choice for Ruth. Even when I was standing right there. So, when Ruth suddenly started acting distant, I should have known something was up. A few months after I asked her to marry me, just before the wedding, she starts canceling dates and leaving my text on read. Whenever I tried to bring it up with her, she would brush me off, saying she was just stressed. She even stopped being excited about planning the wedding, leaving most of the work to me. I mean, she was the bride, so I typically assumed that she would at least be a bit more excited, more involved. She spent more time at my parents' house than at mine, and here I was thinking she was bonding with my mother. I was such an idiot. Invitations were sent out, the cake was paid for in the venue. For some reason I didn't understand back then, my mother seemed overly interested in it. Fast forward to the wedding rehearsal when we were meant to finalize every other detail that would make the day perfect. I was a bit late since there was an incident at my tux fitting. Turns out I was right in time to walk in on an ongoing wedding. Yep, you heard it right. The groom was my brother and the bride, well, you can already guess who. There she was, dressed in white, standing at the end of the aisle beside my brother. And my mother? I'd never seen her beam so much with pride. The room went silent, or maybe I couldn't hear anything at the moment. I just stood rooted at the spot, drinking it all in with my eyes. James's pale face as he turned towards me, and Ruth's guilty expression like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her. I didn't even realize when I took a step forward trying to make sense of what I was looking at, like maybe, just maybe, if I got close enough to touch the image my mind had somehow conjured, it would all go away. I was brought back to the present by Pamela's impatient voice, telling me how I wasn't supposed to be there, how this was best for everybody, and how my supposed fiancé was already expecting. My eyes went to Ruth, silently begging her for an explanation. When I didn't get one, I turned to James, who still could not look me in the eye. Then it hit me. I wasn't just being replaced, I had been erased. The world blurred around me, and my chest felt tight, and everything I knew collapsed in an instant, and all of a sudden it became too hard to breathe. I turned around and walked out. No fighting, no begging, no trying to understand why, I just left. And for the next 3 years, I never looked back. So tell me why, after I moved on, healed, and even found love again, just when I thought the chapter of my life was over, the universe brought the most unexpected and unpleasant surprise to my doorstep. James and Ruth, looking ragged, desperate, and clinging to what looked like a letter from my mother. Automatically, I tried to slam the door right in the face, like it was a reflex, an action of some sort. But not before Ruth tells me I have a child. Without another word, she held up a brown envelope to me, and although it felt like I was about to throw open a Pandora's box, I decided to see what she was on about. Well, it was all there, the DNA test confirming that the child was mine, and a letter from Pamela telling me to fix this mess. Apparently, they needed my help, especially if they were going to get anything out of the inheritance that they were promised. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt powerful. The question is, what the hell do I do with this power? Update number 1. After my last post, I got plenty of advice. Some of you said to slam the door in their face and never look back, while others said to consider the innocent child who obviously had nothing to do with the mistakes the adults made. Well, you won't believe what happened next. After I went through the contents of the brown envelope, I still could not bring myself to invite them in. I just stood there waiting for whatever excuse, could not bring myself to do it, and, well, they had prepared something and told me that the envelope did not contain everything I needed to know. While James barely made eye contact, looking like he would rather be anywhere else, Ruth, on the other hand, held onto the kid like a shield and launched straight into her sob story, telling me how she had been bribed into marrying James, thinking the child was his, how she left them dry and hanging when she found out it was in fact my child, and how she wanted nothing to do with them now. She said she had not planned for things to happen this way. She wanted to tell me the truth, but Pamela made sure she couldn't. She had been forced into all of it and had nowhere else to turn, and it was the same old act. And guys, just like that, I was taken back to the moment when this same girl had stood at the altar with my brother, acting like I never existed. Now, because she had ran out of options, she wanted me to swoop in and fix it? What a joke! James didn't say much, which was typical. He never was able to speak up when it truly mattered. But Ruth, she had this tearful, pitiful expression on her face. It was like, I don't know, she expected me to wipe everything off and get a clean slate, and suddenly become like Father of the Year? Well, I was not about to fall for that so easily, so I did exactly what I said I would. What they all didn't think I was capable of doing. I slammed the door in their face. After ringing the doorbell a few more times, they eventually got the message, and I was not their backup plan. I wasn't their savior. Whatever mess they had created, they were going to have to clean it up themselves. And although the thought of shutting a child out that could actually be mine was not an easy option to entertain, the hardest part of all of it was what had to come next. I had to tell Kyra, my fiancé, my actual partner, the woman who had been by my side these past 3 years. How was I supposed to tell her that I had a child with the woman who betrayed me 3 years ago without sounding like a broken record? I paced around all day, rehearsed a few lines, but it wasn't enough to prepare me for what has come next. She got home from work that evening, exhausted but smiling just like she always did. I had made dinner since I had free time on my hands. Well, maybe just to sweeten the deal. Anyways, it was a pleasant surprise that she appreciated me for. She had no idea what kind of bomb I was about to drop, though. After dinner, I told her everything, from James and Ruth showing up with a child at my doorstep to the DNA test to the letter from my mom. Every single detail. The exhaustion and delight on her face disappeared immediately. She didn't even say anything. I could already see it in her eyes. This wasn't just my problem anymore. In fact, it was about to become an even bigger problem than I could have imagined. She asked what I was going to do, and I told her the truth, that I didn't know for sure yet, but I wasn't about to let the past ruin my future. A future she was now a huge part of. Thinking back on it now, I don't know what I was expecting of her. I didn't know what to hear, but it definitely wasn't what she said. Well, that she was pregnant. You can imagine the rush of emotions I felt all at once. Shock, happiness, excitement, but then guilt. Guilt because as much as I wanted to swoop her up and think of ways that we could celebrate, there was still the reality of my son, the one I had just shut the door on. Kyra knew it too, and she saw right through me to my hesitation because of the fact. And she didn't like it. Scratch that, she wasn't having any of it. It wasn't like her to throw tantrums. She was usually soft-spoken, willing to hear the other side of the story. But that night she made it clear without mincing her words that she wasn't going to raise our child in the middle of a past, and I told her I would move on from it. She said if I chose to involve myself in Ruth and James's mess, the mess my mother created, she wasn't going to stick around and watch me let them ruin our family. I was speechless. I mean, she did have everything right to be upset. I moved on, built a life with her, and now my past is showing up to ruin it. But then again, this wasn't just my past. This is my son that we're talking about. I finally found my voice and told her just that, but she only stared back at me with her arms crossed in front of her with a resolution I'd never seen in her before. And that's when it hit me, no matter what choice I made, somebody was going to lose. Or rather, I was going to lose someone. Kyra stormed out, and just like that, I was at a crossroads for the second time in the span of a day. Some of you might say the answer is simple as it seems, that I should just move on, forget the past, and focus on Kyra and our future together. But then, what about turning out to be even worse of a parent than my mom was to me? Others might say blood is blood, and no matter what Ruth and James did, the child was still mine. There was this DNA test result to prove it, which, by the way, I still plan to confirm. No harm in double-checking, right? Either way, a decision has to be made. Yeah, and quickly, too. It just feels like when I finally made it to a better place than where I was, something just happens to take me back to square one. I'm as confused as ever, and I have a feeling this is just the calm before the storm, and the other shoe is yet to drop. Update number 2. I know it's been a while since I dropped something here. Well, what can I say? I've been trying to make lemonades out of lemons. Life has been throwing those at me. At this point, I think I may have lost count of how many times I've tried to get my life together. Rebuild, move forward. Each time I think I'd survived the worst of it, there's always one last cruel trick awaiting me. After my mother cut me out of my father's will, I had to build from scratch. It wasn't an entirely new concept for me. I mean, I've done well on my own without her anyways. This time, though, the company I worked so hard for was barely holding on, and I was struggling to stay afloat, and guys, you wouldn't believe who came crawling back. None other than the golden child himself. Only he didn't look so golden anymore. He'd finally lost his shine, and if you thought he looked defeated the first time he showed up at my house with Ruth and my child, then you need to see him this time around. No more mother's money, no more perfect family, no more easy handouts. For the first time in his life, he actually looked like he would rock bottom. This time, he didn't ask for money, he didn't ask for any special treatment, he just asked for a job. Said he needed to make things right. Well, at first I was skeptical of the whole give me one last chance to prove myself act, but I could not lie to myself about not needing all the help I could get at the time. So call me an idiot if you want, but I was tired. Tired of fighting and tired of hating. Plus, there was this whole keep your enemies close thing. I thought maybe this is the chance I've been waiting for all my life, so I let him in. And for the first whole months, he actually worked. He showed up on time for 3 months, took orders from me, and he actually turned out to be an asset to the company and helped expand the business. It was like he turned a completely new leaf, and for a while, all was right in the world. It was 3 whole months of pure bliss. My company was finally up and running, blossoming in fact, and James had some shares in the company, and as for Ruth and my son, well, I had to do right by him one way or the other, so yeah. I was secretly supporting him, sending a monthly allowance through an account Kyra knew nothing about to Ruth. And one morning, I got to my office as usual and was greeted by a note from Ruth on my desk saying that she could not live like this any longer. I was confused. I used the office landline to see if I could get access to her, and nothing. The call did not even connect. Beginning to go into panic mode at this point, I called the bank to see if she'd picked up the checks that I just sent, and they told me she didn't. That was when I knew something was up. She was never a day late in picking up the checks, and the worst part was I didn't even know where to begin to look. I certainly didn't want Kyra to suspect anything, so I let it slide. Hoping Ruth knew what she was doing, hoping for the best, and a few months later there was still no word from Ruth, but things actually started looking up. James was indeed providing himself good for the company, and business was booming, and for once I thought I had made the right choice by letting him in. I even got married to Kyra, the woman who had stood by me through all of it, who deserved better than the mess that I drug her into. 3 weeks after our nuptials, I had planned to spoil her silly just to show her how much I appreciated her. Take her somewhere exotic for a much-needed honeymoon getaway, but it turns out she was 5 steps ahead of me in a surprise planning. The worst of its kind, she served me divorce papers, and guess what? She wasn't just asking for a divorce, she was also demanding $100 million in compensation for losing her child. The moment she dropped that bomb, my blood ran cold. When I asked her what the hell she was talking about, she said I abused her. That she had lost the baby because of me, that I was a monster who ruined her life, that she even had pictures to prove it, and it didn't take a rocket science to know that I was being set up and this wasn't some emotional reaction. No, and true to her word, Kyra dragged me to court, told her lies to anyone and everybody who cared, showed her fake photo evidence to anybody and everyone who would look at it, and the twinkle of an eye, I lost everything. My reputation, my company, my future. And then the conniving little jerk of a brother that I thought that I had chose this as the perfect time to make his own move. I came into work one morning and James just wasn't there. His desk was empty, his phone was disconnected, and I stormed back to the office demanding to know where the hell James had gone. But nobody saw him. No calls, no emails, nada. He pulled his stocks from the company, crashing my entire business overnight, and within days I was on the edge of financial ruin. The same man who had come to me, pretending to be broken and desperate, had been playing me the whole time, and he wasn't working alone. I had to sit with the reality that I've been played. Again, I was drowning in lawsuits. My company went bankrupt, my bank accounts were bleeding out, and I was weeks away from losing absolutely everything, including my will to live. And then I ended up getting the strangest of the calls. Yeah, it was so weird. It was from Ruth. She sounded frantic, out of breath even, terrified, and she told me the whole truth about, well, she hadn't left on her own free will. In fact, she was literally abducted by my own mother. Apparently, Ruth had served her purpose after she had secured the perfect marriage with James and kicked me out of the picture. Now, Pamela had no use for her, especially since James wasn't the father of the child that she had, so she literally kidnapped Ruth and my son because she couldn't stand to see me happy, and was working with Kyra and James to make sure I lost everything. Pamela never wanted me to succeed. She used to tell me I was nothing but a stain on her perfect life, and she obviously wanted James to be the sole heir, and if that meant making Ruth disappear, well, so be it. Well, after Ruth finally escaped, she told me she was done playing the puppeteer. And now she's just wanting to be out of this toxic life. My head was still reeling from what I just found out, but this time I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. I decided that if they wanted to destroy my life, they would have to do a hell of a lot better. Because now I had nothing at all to lose. And that made me dangerous. The first thing I did was hire a PI with what money I had left. And within days, we uncovered everything. Kyra's fake pregnancy reports, the doctored pictures of the abuse, and even Pamela's dirty little secret. You guys, that old woman was never even legally married to my father. She was just a helping hand that my father had a fling with before she went ahead and brought in another man's child and lied that it was his. She even went as far as pushing away my family after he passed and forging an entirely different will. One where she and James got everything. The nerve of it. There was nowhere for her to hide now, though. I got in touch with my father's relatives, and together we sued Pamela for fraud and damages. And just like that, the perfect life she built on lies came crushing down. I went to see her one last time just to finally watch her face the consequences of her actions. And when I told her, well, the will had been altered and overturned, and James was facing prison time for fraud, she didn't even bat an eyelid. She just threw back her head and laughed bitterly, sounding like the witch that she is. Then she reached into her bag and drank something straight out of an alcohol flask. Then she looked me dead in the eyes and said she'd always hated herself for giving birth to me. And just like that, she was gone. James was arrested for his role with fraud and forced to pay back the money that he stole from the company. Kyra's case against me, thrown out. She disappeared along with any chance of getting her fake payday. I finally got my son back, and this time, no one's gonna take him from me.